Chapter 1. The Valentine card in the bin February in New York is not a month. It is a posture. The city hunches. The wind finds the seams in your coat and argues with your collar. Even the taxis seem to move with a grudge, as if the slush has insulted them personally. That morning, the brownstone on West 35th Street was behaving as it usually does when the world outside is miserable. It was warm, orderly, and faintly smug. Fritz Brenner had arranged breakfast with the quiet certainty of a man who knows that eggs can repair the spirit, at least temporarily. Nero Wolfe had eaten in the dining room with ceremonial concentration, then retreated upstairs to the plant rooms, where his orchids waited like a private court of entitled nobles. I was in the office, which is my natural habitat when Wolfe is upstairs, and crime has not yet decided to ring the bell. I had paperwork to do, checks to sign, letters to answer, and other small tasks designed to keep my personality from becoming too cheerful. The desk wastebasket sits near my chair, because I am the one who produces most of the waste in that room, both paper and remarks. Wolfe's wastebasket is on his side near the safe, and it usually contains only crisp scraps, torn with a kind of offended precision. I mention this because the object that started the day had no business being there. I saw it when I stood to stretch and give my spine a reason to forgive me. It was on top of the papers in Wolfe's basket, angled, not dropped. A pale envelope, ivory stock, its corners clean, the flap sealed. That alone would have been odd. Wolfe does not discard unopened mail. He either reads it with disdain or orders me to read it with impatience. He does not leave it sealed and then toss it away like a man afraid of the contents. I stepped closer and looked again. It was sealed twice. The first seal looked normal, neat, pressed flat, the adhesive line even. The second was a rougher strip laid over the flap, as if someone had opened it, panicked, and tried to make the panicked act disappear. The second line of adhesive was not a strip of tape. It was glue smeared just enough to show haste and a thumb that had no time for elegance. The envelope had a Valentine look, without going overboard. No hearts, no glitter, no foolishness. Just good paper and a neat hand. The handwriting was controlled, careful. It had the feel of someone who writes with purpose, not impulse. It was addressed simply, Nero Wolfe, West 35th Street, New York. New York, no number, no return address, no stamp. That meant it had been delivered by hand. I stood there a moment, looking at the envelope as if it might speak first. It sat on top of the waste paper, like it had been placed as a display, not discarded as refuse. Wolfe's wastebasket is not a casual location. People do not toss things into it unless they are done with them, or unless they want someone else to find them. That second possibility made the hairs on the back of my neck take interest. I touched the envelope lightly, not yet lifting it, and checked the paper weight with my fingertips. It was heavy enough to be a card, not heavy enough to be a book. No lump that would suggest a key, no stiffness that would suggest a photograph mounted on board. Just a card. A Valentine card in Wolfe's wastebasket. If that does not sound like trouble, you have never met Nero Wolfe. I was still looking at it when the door from the hall opened and Fritz appeared with the calm face of a man who has never been surprised by anything more violent than a souffle collapsing. "Mr. Archie," Fritz said. "Mr. Wolfe will come down in a few minutes. He has finished in the plant rooms." "Good," I said. "Maybe he can explain why there's a Valentine in his trash." Fritz's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Fritz does not gossip, but he notices. He crossed to the desk and looked, his eyes sharpening at the envelope. "This is for Mr. Wolfe," he said. "Apparently," I replied. "It arrived by hand. No stamp, no return address. And it's sealed twice, like someone did surgery, and then tried to pretend the patient was never cut." Fritz studied the flap, then looked at me with a mild disapproval that suggested I should not be touching Wolfe's things, even if Wolfe is the one who put the thing in the wrong place. "I will tell Mr. Wolfe," Fritz said. "He'll be down," I replied. "I'll tell him myself. I'm the one who gets blamed when the air in this house is disturbed." Fritz went back out, and I lifted the envelope carefully. It was not sticky to the touch, which meant the glue had dried. The second seal had a slight ridge, rougher than the first. The paper was good stock, smooth, no cheap fibers. The edges were clean, not nicked, not bent, not handled by a careless messenger. If someone wanted it found, they wanted it found in good condition. I set it on Wolfe's desk, because I like to watch things misbehave closer to their owner. Then I sat and waited. Wolfe came down a few minutes later with the slow dignity of a man who believes stares are a personal insult. He entered the office, glanced at me, glanced at the desk, and stopped when he saw the envelope. He did not touch it. He looked at it as if it were a small animal that might bite. "Where did that come from?" he asked. "From your wastebasket," I said. It was sitting on top like a prize. Wolfe's lips pressed together. "I am aware." That was Wolfe. He did not ask because he needed information. He asked because he wanted the scene arranged in his mind in the proper order. "You placed it there," I said. Wolfe's eyes stayed on the envelope. "I did. And you did not open it." "Number. Is that a new hobby?" I asked. "Collecting sealed Valentines." Wolfe finally looked at me, and his expression suggested that my tone was a small inconvenience. "It is a confession with manners." I blinked. "A confession?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Or an accusation, or a plea. The sender wished discovery, not reading." I leaned back. "That's a confident statement for a man who refuses to read the thing." Wolfe's voice remained calm. "The envelope has been sealed twice. The first sealing is careful, the second is hurried. That indicates an interruption of intent. The sender, or someone else, opened it, then resealed it quickly. If I open it now, I cooperate with the original intent. If I leave it sealed, I force the sender's purpose to remain what it is, an act designed to be found." I stared at him. "You're telling me the act is the message?" "I am telling you," Wolfe said, "that opening it would be a concession to a trap." "A trap that contains a Valentine," I said. "How terrifying." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not be absurd. A Valentine is a form. Forms are used by liars because forms carry expectations. We see a Valentine and assume sentiment. That assumption is the first error." He nodded at the envelope. "Observe it." "I have," I said. "Good paper, controlled handwriting. Delivered by hand, sealed twice. Second seal sloppy." Wolfe nodded slightly, which in his language is praise if you are lucky. "Yes. And the second seal, Mr. Goodwin, identify the glue." "The glue," I repeated. "Before you identify the heart behind it," Wolfe said. "The adhesive is the only element that does not belong to the envelope itself. It is the intrusion. It will tell us who intruded." I held up my hands. "It could tell us someone has glue." Wolfe's gaze turned colder. "It can tell us more than that. Different glues have different uses, and different people use them. If you determine what adhesive was used, you may determine where it was obtained and therefore who applied it." "You want me to play chemist," I said. "You will play investigator," Wolfe corrected. "Chemistry is merely one of its tools." I looked at the envelope again. "You're sure it was opened?" Wolfe did not hesitate. "Yes, then why not open it ourselves and see what was worth resealing?" Wolfe's voice was steady. "Because the act of resealing is more important than the content. Content can be forged, content can be designed for any effect, but haste leaves honest marks." That was pure Wolfe, arrogant and methodical. He likes the parts of human behavior that people cannot fully control. "All right," I said. "How do you want the glue identified? I can lick it." Wolfe's eyes widened slightly, which is rare and never flattering. "You will not place your tongue on unknown adhesive." "It was a joke," I said. "I am not amused," Wolfe replied. I stood and picked up the envelope carefully, holding it by the edges. "I'll take it to someone who knows glues." "Not a clerk in a stationery shop," Wolfe said. "A person with scientific competence." "I know a man," I said. "A lab technician who owes me a favor. He once dropped a tray of cultures and blamed the tray." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Take it, do not open it, do not damage the seal, and Mr. Goodwin." "Yes, sir. Note the angle at which it was placed in the wastebasket." I stared at him. You want the angle? Yes, Wolfe said. The envelope was not tossed. It was placed. Placement implies intent and often implies the hand. A right-handed person places differently than a left-handed person. A tall person places differently than a short one. A man in a hurry places differently than a man who wishes to be neat. I sighed. In your world, even trash has posture. In my world, Wolfe said, everything has posture. I took my notebook and wrote down the detail: envelope atop waste paper, angled toward the desk, flap toward the room, address visible. That meant whoever placed it wanted it noticed quickly. It was not a hidden discard, it was an announcement. Outside, the February wind rattled the windows hard enough to make the glass complain. The office was warm, the rugs thick, the air steady. The contrast between the city and Wolfe's brownstone always makes me feel as if the house is a separate country with its own laws, and Wolfe is the head of state. I put the envelope in a protective folder from my desk drawer, the kind we use for delicate documents, then slipped it into my inside coat pocket. It sat there with a quiet weight that was more than paper. Wolfe watched me, as if judging whether I would drop it on the sidewalk. Before I could leave, the doorbell rang. I paused. Wolfe did not move. Wolfe never moves for a doorbell unless it threatens his orchids. I went to answer and found Saul Panzer on the stoop. Collar up, eyes bright from the cold. Saul is a private operative, which is a polite way of saying he does the legwork I sometimes do when Wolfe decides I am needed elsewhere. Saul was carrying a small package and the expression of a man who has seen something interesting and wants to sell it. "Morning, Archie," Saul said. "You got a minute?" "For you, I have 3, I replied. "Come in." He stepped into the hall, stamped snow from his shoes, and handed me the package. "This is for Wolfe, came by messenger. No name." I was told it was urgent. I was also told, and this was odd, that you would know what to do with it. I frowned. "What is it?" Saul shrugged. "Feels like paper." I did not open it. I brought it into the office and set it on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe looked at it with the same expression he had given the Valentine envelope, which was not reassuring. "Another," he murmured. Saul glanced at me. "Another what?" Wolfe did not answer Saul. He said to me, "Mr. Goodwin, describe the package." I did. Brown paper, twine, no return address. Delivered by messenger. Saul says messenger claimed I would know what to do. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "A performance." Saul shifted, uneasy. Saul is competent, but he does not like being used as an extra in someone else's play. Wolfe looked at Saul. "Who delivered it?" Saul said. "Messenger boy, cap, scarf, the whole routine." I asked questions. He had none. He was paid to deliver, not to know. He said the person who hired him told him to say you would know. Wolfe nodded once, already filing it. I said, "Maybe Valentine has friends." Wolfe's gaze remained on the package. "Perhaps," Saul said. "Do you want me to stick around?" Wolfe finally looked at him. "Number, but you may be needed. Mr. Goodwin will call if necessary." Saul shrugged, accepted that, and left with the resigned grace of a man who knows Wolfe rarely uses courtesy, but often uses results. When the door closed, I looked at Wolfe. 2 deliveries, same morning, one in the trash, one on the desk. Either you're popular, or someone is composing a message in installments. Wolfe's voice was calm. "Someone is insisting on being found." I touched the package lightly, then withdrew my hand. "You want me to identify the twine next?" Wolfe's eyes flicked to my coat pocket where the Valentine envelope sat. "You will do as instructed. Identify the glue." "And the package?" I asked. Wolfe's voice was firm. "Leave it. It is for later. We proceed in order." The first object was placed in my wastebasket, angled for discovery. That was deliberate. The second object arrived through a third party, with a message designed to make you complicit. That too is deliberate. But the first object contains the first intrusion, the second seal. He paused, then added, "Also, Mr. Goodwin, the second seal is messier than the first. That implies haste, and haste implies fear." "Fear is the most informative substance in New York," I nodded. So we chase fear with a glue sample. Wolfe's mouth tightened. We chase method, fear will follow. I went to the hall tree and got my hat and scarf. The wind outside slapped the windows again, impatient. As I was about to leave, Fritz appeared, as quiet as ever. "Mr. Archie, Mr. Wolfe's lunch will be at 1. Wolfe's eyes did not move from his desk. "Yes." Fritz looked at me. "You will be back." "I'll try," I said. "If I get stuck to a laboratory bench, tell Wolfe it was the glue's idea." Fritz's lips twitched slightly, which for Fritz is a grin. Then he vanished back toward the kitchen, where sensible things happen. At the door of the office, I stopped and looked back at Wolfe. He sat there, enormous and composed, his fingers steepled, his eyes on the brown paper package, as if it had offended him personally by existing. "You really won't open the Valentine," I said. Wolfe's voice was flat. "Number." "Because the sender wanted discovery, not reading." "Yes," Wolfe replied. "And because you think opening it gives them something." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Opening it would be a response. I do not respond to anonymous manipulation." I touched the pocket where the envelope rested. "Then I'll carry it around until it tells me who touched it." Wolfe nodded once. "Exactly." I stepped out into the February cold and let the city slap me in the face with wind and noise. The street had that winter look, grey slush at the curb, people moving fast to get somewhere warmer, taxis spraying puddles like they were proud of it. In my pocket, the envelope sat solid and stubborn, a message that insisted on being found without being read. It felt less like paper and more like a small, polite threat. Wolfe had called it a confession with manners. Maybe he was right. Maybe the sender did not want Wolfe to open it at all. Maybe they wanted Wolfe to know that someone, somewhere, could breach the neat world of West 35th Street, and then patch the breach with hurried glue. He headed toward the subway with my collar up and my hand on the pocket, careful not to bend the second seal. A Valentine card in the bin is not romance. It is a signal. And I had the uncomfortable feeling that the real message was not inside the envelope. The real message was that it had been opened already by someone who had no business touching anything that belonged to Nero Wolfe. Chapter 2, Paste, Pressure, and a Patient Eye. The trouble with carrying a sealed Valentine around New York is that you begin to feel like a messenger in a cheap play. Everyone on the street looks as if they know you are hiding something, and in February they already look that way without help. I took the subway because taxis in slush are a form of expensive humiliation, and because I wanted time to think without having to pay a man to glare at me through a rear-view mirror. The envelope sat in my inside pocket, flat and stubborn. I kept my hand on it the way you keep your hand on a wallet in a crowd. Not because you distrust the crowd, but because you distrust human nature. Wolfe had ordered me to identify the glue before I identified the heart behind it. That meant I needed someone who knew adhesives, with the intimacy most people reserve for relatives. New York has specialists for everything. If you want a man to carve your name into a cherry pit, there is a shop for it. If you want a woman to teach your dog to hate your neighbors, there is a number to call. For glue, you go to a stationer who has survived long enough to see trends in paper come and go, and who still believes a proper envelope should behave. I went to a place on the east side called Marlowe Stationery, which smelled of paper, ink, and a mild contempt for modernity. The man behind the counter was in his late 50s, thin as a letter opener, with spectacles that made his eyes look like they were always judging the width of margins. His name was Arthur Marlowe, which is either a gift from fate or a sign that his parents were ambitious. He looked up when I entered, sized me up, and decided I was not a man who had come to buy thank you cards. "What can I do for you?" he asked. "I have an envelope," I said. "That is common," Marlowe replied. "This one is complicated," I told him. "That is less common," he said, and that was the closest he came to warmth. I took the envelope out carefully and laid it on the counter. He did not reach for it immediately. He looked at it as if it might stain his reputation. "Good stock," he said finally. "Cream, heavy hand, delivered, I assume, no stamp, no return address," I said. He nodded. "That is deliberate. 2 seals," I said. Now he reached for it, not with his fingers, but with a small, ivory-handled tool. the sort of thing used to lift paper without leaving oils behind. He angled the envelope under the counter lamp and examined the flap. His mouth tightened. Yes, 2 adhesives. You have a standard gum seal, lightly moistened and pressed. Very neat. Then you have brush. On paste, cheap over. Applied. The second seal was done by someone who does not routinely seal envelopes with care. You can tell it was brushed. He glanced up at me with faint irritation, as if I had asked whether rain was wet. You can see the stroke marks in the dried surface. Also, the paste has a slight shine. Envelope gum dries flatter and more uniform. This paste is the sort children use in school or office clerks when someone buys the wrong supplies. How cheap? I asked. Not the lowest, he said, but inexpensive enough that a person with taste would not use it if alternatives were available. That's valuable, I said, because the envelope is not cheap. Exactly, he replied. The person who used the paste did not choose the envelope. The person who chose the envelope used gum and did it neatly. The person who used paste arrived later, hurried, and attempted to conceal the earlier seal. I nodded. So, we have at least 2 hands, or 1 hand in 2 moods, he said. I liked him. He was cautious but not stupid. Can you tell me what kind of paste? I asked. He sniffed lightly, then hesitated and looked at me with a mixture of pride and caution. I can tell you the type. It is a brush, on paste, water-based, the kind that comes in a small jar with a stiff brush under the cap. I can also tell you the smell of it, which has a mild sour note when it dries. You are telling me you sniff glue for a living, I said. He did not smile. I sniff paper, sir. Glue is incidental, I said. That paste is used by who? He finally allowed himself a tiny shrug. Anyone who has it. Office administrators, charities. Often they do mailings, and someone buys paste in bulk because it is cheap. They do not notice that it looks vulgar. Charities, I repeated, and I felt the envelope gain weight. Marlowe tapped the envelope lightly with the ivory tool. Do you intend to open it? No, I said. He looked relieved. Wise, this second seal is a clumsy repair. If you open it, you destroy evidence. I'm not a man who enjoys destroying evidence, I said. He looked at my hands and decided, correctly, that I was a man who enjoys trouble. As I started to pocket the envelope, he said, If you wish, I can tell you something else. I paused. Tell me. He nodded toward the flap. The first seal is pressed very evenly, straight line, consistent pressure. The second paste seal is slightly angled, not matching the flap edge. That suggests the envelope was resealed while held in the air, perhaps against a palm, not against a desk, I said. So someone was in a hurry. Marlowe's eyes were cool, or someone did not have privacy. I paid him for his time, which offended him slightly, because he would have preferred admiration. Then I left and took the subway back to West 35th Street, thinking about paste and about the kind of person who would carry a brush on paste jar around. It is not something you slip into your evening bag unless your evening is unusual. At the brownstone, Fritz let me in with his usual quiet calm. The house smelled faintly of good food and clean polish. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, the brownstone refused to acknowledge it. Wolfe was in the office behind his desk, reading or pretending to read, which is sometimes the same thing. He looked up as I entered, saw my face, and chose to be attentive. You have identified the adhesive, he said. Yes, I replied. 2 adhesives. First seal is standard gum, neat, pressed evenly. Second seal is cheap brush, on paste, the jar kind with a stiff cap brush, applied in haste stroke marks. Slight shine, angled. Marlowe says the second seal was likely done without a flat surface, maybe against a palm. That suggests hurry or lack of privacy. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly, and his hands steepled. Good now. Who in our circle would use paste instead of envelope gum? That was Wolfe. I had barely finished my sentence, and he was already moving to the next gate. In our circle, I said. Meaning people who might have handled an envelope meant for you. Oh, precisely. Wolfe replied. Paste is not common in private correspondence. It is common in organizations that mail in bulk, charities, committees, offices with careless purchasing. I sat in my chair and continued. Marlowe mentioned charities. Also, I noticed something else while I was out. Yes, I said, so I tested it. I went through a stack of invitations and formal stationery we have in the front hall tray, the ones you ignore until a body arrives. The stock matches a local charity's formal invitations. Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction more. Which charity? The Valentine fundraising people, I said. The Heartstone Shelter Committee. They send thick, creamy, speckled invitations. It is a signature look. I remembered it because you once complained. Their paper was too proud for their prose. Wolfe made a sound that might have been agreement or indigestion. I added. The inner card stock also feels like that. I did not open it, but I could feel the thickness, and the envelope's rigidity matches a folded card of that type. Wolfe's gaze drifted to the envelope, as if he could interrogate it through the paper. Interesting. Also, I said. When I held it under light at Marlowe's counter, I saw faint indentations on the back side through the envelope. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Indentations. I nodded. Someone wrote on a hard surface, then stopped, then resumed. You can see the pressure marks. A line begins, pauses, then continues. Same hand. Different pressure, like the writer hesitated. Wolfe leaned back slightly, and his voice became softer, which is how he sounds when he is pleased by something unpleasant, hesitation you can measure. That's what it felt like, I said. Wolfe nodded once. The first seal is factory, neat. The second seal is a hand trying to hide the first. That implies the envelope was opened and resealed, but not destroyed. I said, that's the part that bothers me. If secrecy was the goal, why not destroy the card entirely? Tear it up, burn it, drop it in the river, which is what New Yorkers do with conscience when it gets heavy. Wolfe's gaze turned cold, because the intent was not secrecy. Then what? I asked. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Control over who discovers it. The sender wished the envelope to be found, in a specific place, at a specific time, by a specific person, not read, found. I frowned. So someone wanted you to know it had been opened? Yes, Wolfe said. And someone wanted you, Mr. Goodwin, to know that someone else interfered. That's complicated, I said. Crime often is, Wolfe replied. Simplicity is for honest men and fools. He looked at the envelope again, then at me. You noted it was placed on top of the waste paper, angled, visible. That is not discard, that is placement. It was put there to be discovered, I said. By me. Wolfe nodded. Naturally. You are the one who empties wastebaskets, metaphorically and sometimes literally. The sender understands the household's habits. I felt my spine tighten, meaning the sender knows the brownstone, or has observed it, Wolfe said. Observation is cheaper than intimacy. I leaned forward. So, we have a charity stock, 2 adhesives, and a measurable hesitation. We also have the fact it arrived with no stamp, no return address, and then ended up in your wastebasket sealed twice. Wolfe's eyes were half closed now, the patient look he gets when he is letting details settle into their proper grooves. Yes. What next? I asked. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. We attend a meeting. A meeting, I repeated. Yes, Wolfe said. A Valentine fundraising committee meeting. This afternoon, Heartstone Shelter Committee, you will go. I blinked. Meme. Wolfe's lips pressed together. I do not attend committee meetings, Mr. Goodwin. Committees are the natural predators of intelligence, unless circumstances become intolerable. True, I said. But why that committee, besides the paper? Wolfe's voice was firm. Because the paper is not merely paper, it is a signature. Also because paste is common in charitable mailings, and because charitable committees contain 2 useful types. People who feel righteous and people who feel trapped. Either type may send an anonymous confession with manners. I nodded slowly. And you think someone on that committee opened the envelope? Wolfe's gaze stayed steady. Or someone connected to it. The resealing was hurried. That suggests interruption, fear, or sudden necessity. A committee meeting provides all three. People arrive, people interrupt, people fear exposure, people carry paste. I said, "You make committees sound like a crime scene." "They often are," Wolfe replied. I glanced at the envelope on Wolfe's desk. "Are you ever going to open it?" Wolfe's tone was calm. "Eventually, perhaps, when opening it serves my purpose, not the sender's." I stood. "So I go to a committee meeting, sniff paste, and look for hesitation." "You will look for hands," Wolfe corrected. "Hands that use paste, hands that apply pressure, then pause, then resume. Hands that know the brownstone's habits." I grinned. "All right, I'll go watch polite people pretend to care about shelter dogs while plotting each other's downfall." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not be vulgar." "Not vulgar," I said. "Accurate." Wolfe ignored that. "Also, Mr. Goodwin, take Saul Panzer with you." I blinked. "Saul?" Wolfe nodded. "Yes, this is an environment where discreet observation may be useful. Saul excels at being present without being noticed." "That's his whole charm," I said. Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. "Go." I went to the hall and called Saul, who answered as if he had been waiting for my voice. When I told him we were attending a Hearthstone Shelter Committee meeting, he laughed once and then stopped because he realized I was serious. "A charity committee," he said. "That's worse than a gangster." "Gangsters are honest about their motives," I told him. "Be at the brownstone in 20 minutes." I hung up and returned to the office to get my coat. Wolfe was already back to his book, but I could tell he was not reading. He was listening to the envelope without opening it, which is one of his more irritating talents. As I reached for the doorknob, Wolfe spoke without looking up. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes, sir." "The question is not why the card was not destroyed. It's not. It is why it was delivered to my wastebasket," Wolfe said. "A bin is a place of rejection. Whoever placed it there wished to imply that I rejected it. That implication is the first falsehood." I nodded, and the cold outside suddenly felt less like weather and more like warning. "I'll go find the committee," I said, "and see who likes falsehoods with good stationery." Wolfe's voice was calm. "Do so. The paste has already told us one thing. The intruder was not elegant. The intruder was urgent." I stepped out into the February wind with the envelope still sealed, still heavy, still insisting on discovery. If it was a confession with manners, as Wolfe called it, then the manners were not for Wolfe's benefit. They were for the sender's. And that meant someone on a Valentine committee had decided that the safest place to hide a truth was in plain sight, placed carefully on top of the trash, angled like a clue. Chapter 3. The Committee of Warm Smiles, the Hearthstone Shelter people, had chosen a townhouse on East 62nd Street for their committee meeting, which made sense if you believed compassion needed polished brass and a parlor large enough to make guilt comfortable. The February wind followed Saul and me all the way up the stoop, slapped at the door as we went in, then stayed outside like a dog that had been denied entry. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of flowers and money. There were vases on side tables, not showy arrangements, but careful ones, February greens and pale blossoms, chosen to suggest both taste and restraint. That is what charity committees are always selling: taste and restraint, and occasionally a cause. Saul handed his coat to a maid without looking at her long enough to be remembered. Saul is good at that. I hung on to mine for a moment and checked my pocket by habit. Though the Valentine envelope was not with me, Wolfe had kept it on his desk, sealed and stubborn, like a small animal that refused to die. He had said I was to go to the committee meeting, not to the committee with the envelope. It was a wise precaution in New York. Anything you carry can become someone else's evidence. A woman in her 40s met us at the parlor entrance with a practiced smile and a clipboard, which meant she was either the hostess or the secretary. She was the secretary. "Helen Brooks," she said. "You must be Mr. Goodwin." "That's me," I said, "and this is Saul Panzer. He helps me not get lost." Saul smiled warmly. Saul can smile warmly at a parking ticket. Helen Brooks' smile did not change, but her eyes sharpened. People who run committees learn to spot outsiders quickly. Outsiders threaten rhythm. We weren't expecting you, she said. Neither were we, I told her. But charity and coincidence often share a calendar. Her smile tightened a fraction, but she gestured us in. The parlor was bright and arranged for comfort. The furniture was expensive but not aggressive. The light was a mix of afternoon sun and lamps placed with intention. There were people gathered in small clusters, laughing politely, making February jokes about the cold, and holding cups of coffee as if coffee were part of the mission. The warm smiles in that room were practiced. I could tell by the way they appeared and vanished without leaving marks. The cause, Hearthstone Shelter, was noble enough. The manner of discussing it was the usual blend of sincerity and social habit. I watched Hans because Wolfe had trained me to. Hans held cups, tapped saucers, straightened papers, touched pearls. Hans revealed impatience and caution, and sometimes guilt. Helen Brooks guided us toward the center of the room, where a man with silver hair and a narrow, confident face was speaking too loudly about donations. He had the voice of someone accustomed to having his comments treated as decisions. "That's Martin Hale," Helen murmured. Committee chair. Martin Hale turned when we approached, saw strangers, and adjusted his expression. His smile arrived like a curtain lifting. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, extending a hand. "We were not told to expect visitors." "It was a last-minute impulse," I said, shaking his hand. "Blame February." His grip was firm, controlled, and slightly damp. That was not fear, just effort. Martin's eyes flicked to Saul, then back. "And you are?" "Saul Panzer," Saul said smoothly. "I work with Mr. Goodwin." "Of course," Martin said, as if that explained everything and nothing. Helen Brooks took her place near a small writing table to the side, where a ledger lay open beside a stack of envelopes and a neat row of stamps. There was a cup holding pens, and beside it, almost hidden in its ordinariness, a small jar with a brush under the cap paste. I did not stare at it too long. You can see more by pretending not to see. Saul drifted toward a window and became part of the room. He has that talent. In 3 minutes he looked like a man who had been invited and had arrived early. I stepped closer to Helen's writing table. "Busy week for mail," I said lightly. Helen's smile returned, quick, always. Valentine invitations went out in batches. "Identical stationery," I said, not as a question. She blinked once. "Yes, we use a standard stock. We order it in bulk." "Good stock," I said. "Thick, creamy, slightly speckled." Her eyes narrowed a fraction, then returned to neutral. "It is our committee stationery." "Nice," I said. "It makes the shelter sound important." "It is important," she replied, a little too quickly. I nodded, as if chastened. "Of course. How many invitations?" Helen hesitated, then answered, "Dozens, perhaps 70. We have a mailing list." "Any trouble?" I asked. "Missing mail returned. Complaints." Martin Hale's voice cut in too smooth. "If you've come to discuss postal issues, Mr. Goodwin, we can refer you to our secretary later. We are here to discuss the benefit and the shelter's needs." That was the push. It came too early, too fast. A man does not redirect a conversation from mail unless mail is the part he wants buried. "I came because an item of mail reached Nero Wolfe," I said. The room's warmth cooled slightly. In a group like that, a famous name is a bell. It makes heads turn. Martin's smile stayed in place, but it tightened around the edges. "Mr. Wolfe." "Yes," I said. A Valentine envelope, committee stock, delivered by hand, sealed twice. Helen Brooks' fingers paused on her clipboard. The pause was small, but it existed. Her nails were clean. Her fingers were ink-free. She handled paper often, but she handled it carefully. When I said sealed twice, she flinched. It was not dramatic. It was a slight lift of the hand, a tightening at the wrist, the kind of flinch you might pretend was a correction of posture. Except no one else had mentioned posture. Martin Hale's voice stayed calm. What does this have to do with Hearthstone? I'm here to find out, I said. Your secretary just confirmed you mailed invitations this week on identical stationery. Helen swallowed. Yes. And, I said, one was reported missing. Helen's eyes widened slightly. How did you know that? I shrugged. I guessed because missing mail is the only reason for a second seal. That was not completely true, but it was useful. Helen glanced toward Martin. Martin did not look at her. That told me more than words. A woman in a blue dress, wearing a brooch, shaped like a small dog, spoke up with practiced concern. We did have an odd incident. One invitation was missing from the stack. It was meant for a donor. It caused a little scramble. Martin Hale smiled at her, gratitude mixed with warning. Thank you, Elaine. Helen's voice was soft. Yes, one invitation was reported missing. Then it was returned. It returned how? I asked. Helen's hands tightened on the clipboard. It was placed on my desk. No explanation, just there. When? I asked. Yesterday morning, Helen said. By whom? I asked. Helen shook her head. I do not know. My office door was unlocked. Committee volunteers come in and out. That's convenient, I said. Martin Hale's smile sharpened. Mr. Goodwin, are you accusing my staff? I am accusing nobody, I said. Yet, I am asking questions. You should ask them at the shelter office, Martin said. Not here. I will ask them where answers exist, I replied. And right now the answers are in this room. That earned me a few more stiff smiles and a couple of looks that were less polite. Charity committees like control. That is why they form committees. Helen Brooks cleared her throat. Mr. Goodwin, perhaps we can speak privately. That is always attractive, I said. But Nero Wolfe dislikes privacy when it is used to hide things. He prefers public discomfort. At that moment, the parlor door opened again. If I had been writing the day as fiction, I would have arranged a dramatic entrance. Wolfe does not do dramatic. Wolfe does inevitable. Nero Wolfe entered the room as if it had been built for him and had merely been waiting. His coat was heavy, his hat precise, his face set in the expression of a man who has left his brownstone unwillingly and is determined to make the world pay for it in efficiency. The warm smiles in the room adjusted instantly. People who have never met Nero Wolfe still recognize something about him. Perhaps it is the mass of him, or the way he occupies space, or the look in his eyes that suggests he does not care whether you approve of him. Sol Panzer moved a step to the side, so that Wolfe had a clear path, then became invisible again. Wolfe glanced at me. Mr. Goodwin. Sir, I said. Wolfe's gaze swept the parlor with a quick, dismissive assessment. This is an environment designed for pretense. Martin Hale stepped forward quickly, smile ready. Mr. Wolfe, an honor. Wolfe looked at his hand and did not take it. You are Mr. Hale. Martin's hand retreated. Yes, Martin Hale, Chair. May I ask why you are here? You may ask, Wolfe replied. I may choose to answer. That gave the room a chill. Wolfe does that without raising his voice. Wolfe's eyes settled on Helen Brooks. He watched her hands before he watched her face. That is something he taught me, and seeing him do it in person reminded me that I still had lessons left. Helen's nails were clean, her fingers were free of ink, her hands were competent, careful. When Wolfe's gaze landed on her, she stiffened slightly, then smoothed herself, as if trying to become less visible. Wolfe said, You are the secretary. Helen nodded. Helen Brooks. You mailed Valentine invitations this week, Wolfe said. Yes, Helen replied. Many on our stationery. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly, and one was missing. Helen swallowed. Yes. And then it was returned, Wolfe said. Helen nodded again. Yes, it was placed on my desk. Wolfe's gaze drifted to the writing table, and I saw his eyes pause on the paste jar. He did not move toward it. He did not touch it. He simply noted it. The way a man notes the presence of a snake. He said, Brush on paste, an inelegant choice. Helen's cheeks reddened. We use what we have. Wolfe's voice was calm. Indeed, people use what they have. That is why it is informative. Martin Hale interjected smoothly. Mr. Wolfe, surely this is not about office supplies. Our shelter is in need. We have donors to engage. Wolfe's eyes turned to him. You are eager to shift the subject. Martin's smile held. I am eager to focus on our purpose. Wolfe's voice remained mild. Purpose can be a mask. Martin's smile faltered a fraction, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe gestured slightly toward Helen's ledger. Miss Brooks, I wish to see your outgoing mail log. The effect in the room was immediate. It was not dramatic, but it was visible. A stiffening, as Wolfe had predicted, like a ribbon being pulled tight. Several heads turned toward Helen. One woman's cup paused halfway to her lips. Saul's eyes flicked once, quick as a camera shutter, then returned to soft focus. Helen hesitated. Our log is internal. Wolfe's tone stayed calm. Your stationery has reached my wastebasket by an unusual route. Your internal log may become my external concern. Show it to me. Martin Hale stepped forward again, voice firm. Mr. Wolfe, I cannot allow you to demand our records in a private home. This is not your committee to control, Wolfe said. And you are not in control of this conversation. Martin's jaw tightened. Then I must ask you to leave. Wolfe looked at him, as if Martin were a chair placed in the wrong corner. You may ask. I may choose not to comply. Kramer's voice sounded from the hallway behind Wolfe, and the effect was instant. Polite people relax when authority arrives, even when authority is ugly. Afternoon, Kramer said, stepping into the parlor. He had chosen to accompany Wolfe, which meant Wolfe had asked him to. Kramer nodded at Wolfe, then looked at the committee members with the weary irritation of a man who has dealt with too many respectable faces hiding too many ugly facts. Martin Hale's smile returned. Weaker now. Inspector, surely this is unnecessary. Kramer grunted. That depends on how cooperative you feel like being. Wolfe's eyes did not leave Helen Brooks. Miss Brooks, the mail log. Helen's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the ledger. She picked it up and carried it to a side table near Wolfe, opening it with careful fingers. She tried to steady her voice. We track outgoing invitations, she said. Recipient names, delivery method, messenger if used, and returns. Wolfe said, read the entries for the missing invitation. Helen's eyes moved over the page. It was addressed to Nero Wolfe. It was prepared, logged, and set with the outgoing batch. And then, Wolfe prompted. Helen swallowed. It was marked missing. We could not locate it in the outgoing pile. Wolfe's voice was calm. Who reported it missing? Helen hesitated. I did. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You noticed it missing? Yes, Helen said quickly. I count the batch before it goes out. And who had access to the batch between your counting and the messenger's pickup? Wolfe asked. Helen's eyes flicked to Martin Hale, then away. Committee members, volunteers, anyone in the office. Wolfe's voice stayed steady. Name, the person who handles deliveries. Helen exhaled. Cal Turner. Mr. Turner, Wolfe said. A messenger. Yes, Helen replied. He picks up deliveries, drops them off, returns any undelivered mail, and brings receipts. Wolfe nodded, and the missing invitation returned. Helen's voice was smaller now. Yes, it was placed on my desk. No note, no explanation, just returned, Wolfe said. At what hour? Helen blinked. Around 11. I arrived at 10:30. It was not there. I stepped out to take a call. When I returned, it was on my desk. Wolfe's eyes were cold. So it arrived while you were absent. That suggests the person who returned it did not wish to meet you. Helen's hands tightened on the ledger. Yes. Wolfe's gaze moved once more to the paste jar, and yet brush on paste was used. Helen whispered. We seal some envelopes with paste when the gum fails. Wolfe said, or when the envelope has been opened. Helen's face went pale. Martin Hale's voice snapped. Too sharp now. This is ridiculous. We are discussing charity invitations, not murder. Wolfe's eyes turned to him. We are discussing control. Charity is often a convenient arena for it. Kramer grunted. If you got nothing to hide, show the log and stop flapping. That was not elegant, but it was effective. The room's warm smiles had cooled to thin lines. Wolfe nodded once, as if concluding a small proof. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir, I said. You have heard the name Cal Turner, Wolfe said. You will find him. I nodded. Right away. Wolfe's gaze returned to Helen Brooks. Miss Brooks, your hands are clean. Your nails are cared for. Your fingers are free of ink. You handle paper without staining it, yet you flinched when envelopes were mentioned. Helen swallowed. I did not. Wolfe's tone was calm. You did. You may not have been aware. You will now become aware. Helen's eyes darted toward Martin Hale, and Martin's jaw tightened. Wolfe said, Mr. Hale, you attempted to steer conversation away from mail toward donations with undue urgency. You do not wish the mail discussed. That implies the mail is dangerous to you. Martin's voice rose slightly. I wish to focus on our mission. Wolfe's tone remained mild. Mission is a pleasant word. It does not erase motive. Kramer shifted, irritated. Wolfe, you got what you wanted. Let's go. Wolfe nodded, already done with the parlor. He turned slightly toward the door, then paused and spoke one last sentence. Not to the group, but to the air. The envelope has passed through at least 3 hands, Wolfe said. Martin Hale's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Wolfe did not answer him directly. He looked at me. The original sender sealed it properly. A second person opened it. A third person resealed it with paste in haste. It may have returned to the sender, or it may have been redirected. Either way, it was manipulated. He turned to Helen Brooks. You will keep your log available. You will not attempt to tidy it. Inspector Kramer will regard that as a mistake. Helen nodded stiffly. Wolfe moved toward the door with the air of a man leaving an unpleasant restaurant. Saul followed, without being seen. Kramer followed because he was curious, and because Wolfe had made him curious. Outside, the February wind was still rattling the city. Inside the townhouse, the warm smiles were now strained, as if the flowers had been told they were artificial. In the car back to West 35th Street, Wolfe said nothing until we had passed 3 blocks, and the city had resumed its usual grudge. Then he spoke calmly. Mr. Goodwin, the committee is not warm. It is controlled. That is why it is useful. I nodded. We have a secretary with clean hands and a flinch, a chair who pushes too quickly, and a messenger named Cal Turner. Wolfe's eyes were half closed. Yes, find Mr. Turner, he may be the third hand. And the second, I said, if he opened it. Wolfe's voice stayed steady, perhaps, or perhaps he merely carried it. Messengers carry guilt the way they carry envelopes, without knowing the weight. I looked out at the grey city, the lights coming on early, the people moving fast, and I thought about the Valentine envelope, sitting sealed on Wolfe's desk, refusing to be opened, insisting on being found. A committee of warm smiles had stiffened at the mention of a mail log. That meant the mail mattered. Somewhere in the middle of this, a man named Cal Turner was walking around New York with other people's papers. And if Wolfe was right, he was not the only hand. The trouble with an envelope sealed twice is that it tells you the message is not inside. The message is that someone wanted to control who held it, when, and why. Chapter 4. The messenger who never forgets a Dora messenger is the sort of man New York builds by accident and keeps by necessity. He is part mule, part memory, and part resentment. He carries other people's urgency all day and still gets blamed when their urgency arrives wrinkled. Saul Panzer and I left Wolfe in the brownstone with his orchids and his temper, which are both safer when handled on schedule. Wolfe had listened to my report on the Heartstone Shelter Committee with his eyes half closed, as if he were tasting a sauce. He had asked 3 questions, each of them irritatingly simple: who handled their deliveries, who touched their outgoing mail ledger, who used brush on paste. I had come back with the name Cal Turner. Wolfe had nodded once, like a judge marking a docket, and told me to find him. That was as close as Wolfe comes to enthusiasm. So Saul and I went hunting for a man whose job was doors. The delivery depot was in a low brick building near the west side, the kind of place that looks temporary but survives decades. Trucks sat outside like tired animals, a metal roll-up door yawned open, and men in layered clothing moved in and out with packages under their arms and complaint on their faces. February air hung in the loading bay like a punishment. Inside, the smell was cardboard, diesel, and old coffee that had been reheated too many times. Saul became invisible in the usual way, by looking like he belonged there. I did not bother. I have never looked like I belonged in a loading dock, unless the dock was for typewriters. A dispatcher behind a battered counter glanced up. He had the glazed eyes of a man who has argued with roots so long the roots have won. "I'm looking for Cal Turner," I said. The dispatcher's chin lifted. "Who wants him?" "A man who pays his bills," I replied, which is rare enough that Cal ought to be curious. The dispatcher snorted, then jerked his head toward a side corridor. "Cal route board." I found Cal Turner standing in front of a wall map, with colored pins. One hand holding a clipboard, the other holding a pencil like a weapon. He was in his mid-30s, compact, wearing a knit cap and a jacket, with too many pockets. His face had the alert look of a man who never stops calculating time. If you told him the world was ending, he would ask what street it was on and whether parking was legal. He turned when I approached, and his eyes took me in fast. He looked at my shoes, my coat, my hands. Messengers read people the way other men read street signs. "Yeah," he said. "What?" "My name is Archie Goodwin," I told him. "I'm looking into a little trouble involving an envelope you handled." Cal's mouth tightened. "I handle a lot of envelopes." "This one is special," I said. "Heartstone Shelter Committee stationery. Valentine. Thick stock, handwritten correction on the label resealed with paste." That got his attention. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you with, the cops?" "Not exactly," I said. "I work for Nero Wolfe." It was fun watching his expression change. Not fear exactly, more like the sudden awareness that he was not dealing with the usual office complaint. "Wolfe's name does that. It makes people remember that words can have consequences," Cal said. "I didn't steal anything." "I didn't say you did," I replied. "But you touched it, carried it, and you remember doors. That's why I'm here." Saul had drifted to a stack of parcels nearby and was pretending to examine labels. His ears were doing their real work. Cal shifted his clipboard against his hip. "Look, I'm reliable. I don't lose things, people lose things, and then blame me. That's how it goes." "That sounds like a mission statement," I said. "Relax. I'm not here to ruin your day. I'm here to understand why an envelope ended up in my employer's wastebasket with 2 seals." Cal blinked. "Wolfe's wastebasket." "Exactly," I said. "That's a strange destination for a Valentine." Cal's jaw worked. "So what? You want my route log?" "I want your memory first," I said. "Route logs can be tidy. Memories are messier. Messy is helpful," he snorted. "My memory is fine. That's what I'm counting on," I said. "Start with this. Did you return a Valentine envelope for Heartstone this week?" Cal hesitated. "Just a fraction." Then he nodded. "Yeah." "Why?" "Because the address was corrected mid-route," he said. That was one of those sentences that makes a case sit up a little straighter. I said, "Explain mid-route." Cal scratched his cheek with the pencil. "I pick up a stack from their office. Addresses, labels, stuff. I go out, drop, get signatures if needed, do returns. On that day, I had a Valentine envelope. Thick stock, like you said. I had it on my route sheet. I was heading to West 35th Street with it. Then I got a call." "From who?" I asked. He frowned. "From the Heartstone office. Helen Brooks, the secretary." That name landed like a coin on a table. "What did she say?" I asked. Cal shifted his weight. She said, "Bring that envelope back." She said the label needed correcting. Needed correcting, I repeated. Cal nodded. She said it like it was normal, but it wasn't typed wrong. It was already neat. Did she say what was wrong? I asked. Cal shrugged. She said the donor's address had changed. Something like that. She said, "Do not deliver until I fix it." I said, "So you returned it to her?" "Yeah," Cal said. "I went back. That eats time and I don't like time eaten. But they're a regular client." I nodded. "And the correction?" Cal's eyes narrowed, remembering. The correction wasn't typed. That's what stuck with me. Usually, if you correct a label, you print a new one, or you slap a new one over it. But this was handwritten. Same careful style as the original address. That made my stomach do a small satisfied turn. I said, "Careful style, controlled handwriting, not a scribble." Cal nodded. "Exactly. Whoever wrote it had good pen control. It looked like the same hand as the original label, or close enough that you'd think it was." "Would you?" I asked. "Bet your root board on it." Cal glanced at the map like it was sacred. "I don't bet on anything, but yeah, it looked consistent, like it was meant to look consistent." That was a good phrase, meant to look consistent. Saul shifted slightly near the parcels, still silent, still listening. I said, "So Helen corrected the address." Cal scratched his jaw again. "She did not write on it while I watched, if that's what you mean." "What did she do?" I asked. Cal frowned. "She took the envelope into her little office. She told me to wait." "How long?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not long. 5 minutes, maybe less." "Did she bring it back?" I asked. Cal nodded. "Yes, she handed it to me and said it was fixed." "And you delivered it?" I said. "No," Cal replied quickly. "That's the part. She told me to wait again." I blinked. "Wait again? Why?" Cal hesitated, then said, "She said she had to fix the seal." That was the sentence I had come for. It sat there between us like a dead bird. I said, "Fix the seal." Cal nodded, defensive. "Yeah, she said it like the flap wasn't sticking right, like the gum failed." "And you believed her?" I said. Cal's eyes narrowed. "I don't get paid to question gum." "Fair." I said, "So you waited while she fixed it?" "Yeah," Cal said. "She went to that side table they got with the ledger. She has supplies there, she was fussing with something. Then she handed it back and said, 'Okay, go.' I leaned in. What did she use?" Cal's face tightened as he recalled. "Paste." "Describe it," I said. Cal shrugged. "School paste, that smell sharp and chalky. I hated it in school and I hate it now." That was nearly perfect. It matched Marlowe's description, and it matched what I had seen on that side table in the parlor. The paste jar waiting like a confession that didn't know it was one. He said, "You saw the paste jar?" Cal nodded. "Yeah, she used it. She brushed it on, pressed the flap, then pressed again. She was careful, but she was in a hurry." "In a hurry?" I said. Cal frowned. "She kept looking at the door, like she expected someone." "That is useful," I told him. Cal's shoulders rose. "So what? Now you're saying Helen opened the envelope?" "I'm saying someone did," I replied. "And someone resealed it with paste. Helen is one candidate, but candidates are not conclusions." Cal's face hardened. "Helen's not a crook. She's a committee secretary. She counts envelopes. She's always counting something." "I like secretaries," I said. "They keep the world from collapsing, but they also see everything that can make them dangerous in interesting ways." Cal snorted. "You talk like a book." "That's because I read them," I said. "Now tell me this. After she fixed the seal, did she give you any instruction about returning the envelope later?" Cal frowned, thinking. "She said if it came back, bring it to her personally. Do not leave it with anyone else." "Personally," I repeated. Cal nodded. "Yes, like it mattered, like she didn't trust the office." That lined up with the missing invitation story, one missing, then returned while she was absent. Then her insistence that returns come to her personally. Either she was trying to control the envelope's path, or she was being controlled by someone else and trying not to show it. "Did it come back?" I asked. Cal shook his head. Not to me, no return. At least not in my route returns. That's why I'm confused. You're saying it ended up at Wolfe's place. It did, I said. And it was placed in Wolfe's wastebasket, angled like someone wanted it discovered. Cal stared. That's crazy. New York, I said. It specializes in crazy that wears good shoes. I asked a few more questions. Times, dates. Who else was in the Heartstone office that day? Who might have entered while Helen was waiting? Cal answered with the reluctant precision of a man who prides himself on route accuracy. He remembered a volunteer in a bright scarf. He remembered Martin Hale's voice in the hallway, impatient and quick. He remembered Helen's eyes flicking toward a closed door before she used the paste brush. He remembered too much for comfort. When I was done, I said, Cal, you've helped. If anyone asks you about this conversation, you tell them the truth, which is that you told me nothing you did not already tell your route board. Cal scowled. What if they try to blame me? I smiled. If they try, tell them to call Nero Wolfe. He enjoys correcting blame. That did not make him feel better, but it made him quiet, which was good enough. Saul and I left the depot and rode back toward West 35th Street. Saul said nothing until we were in the taxi, because Saul prefers to speak where the walls are moving and nobody can linger. Finally, he said, Cal's good. He's proud, I said. Pride makes memory sharp. Saul nodded. Helen asked him to wait while she fixed the seal. That means she had the envelope open, or it was open when it arrived to her. Or someone else opened it and used her as the repair station. I said. Saul glanced at me. And that correction on the label, handwritten to match the original, that sounds staged. It does, I agreed. Someone wanted the envelope to travel in a particular direction without looking like it changed hands. Saul's mouth tightened. 3 hands, like Wolfe said. Sender, opener, resealer. Maybe more, I said, but 3 at minimum. Back at the brownstone, Fritz let us in and took our coats with his usual calm. The house smelled like Theodore had been at work, rich and patient. Wolfe had been fed properly, which made him more tolerable, though not much. Wolfe was in the office, seated behind his desk. The Valentine envelope was still there, untouched, still sealed twice, looking innocent and stubborn. Wolfe looked up as I entered. You have found Mr. Turner? Yes, I said, and he never forgets a door. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. Rear port. I told him everything, because Wolfe hates suspense unless he has arranged it himself. I described Cal's route pride, his call from Helen Brooks, the mid-route correction, the handwritten label, the wait, the seal repair, the school paste smell, and Helen's glances toward the door. Wolfe listened with his eyes half closed, his fingers steepled, the patient eye of a man who enjoys being right but prefers being precise. When I finished, Wolfe opened his eyes fully and repeated one line as if stamping it into the room. A seal repaired is a seal betrayed. He said it the way a judge says guilty. I exhaled. That's poetic, boss. It is accurate, Wolfe replied. I nodded toward the envelope on his desk. Helen could be clumsy, not guilty. Maybe she fixed it with paste, because they use paste for bulk mailings. Wolfe's gaze stayed steady. Yes, Helen Brooks could be clumsy. She could also be frightened. Clumsiness and fear often resemble each other. So, I said, we do not hang the secretary yet. Wolfe's mouth tightened. We do not hang anyone. We arrange facts until hanging becomes unnecessary. I leaned forward. Then what does Helen's paste mean? It means, Wolfe said, that the envelope passed through her hands while its integrity was compromised. The resealing occurred in her presence, by her hand, or by another, using her supplies. She remembers it. She flinched when envelopes were mentioned. She is aware of betrayal, I said, or she is aware of being used. Wolfe nodded slightly. That is possible. I pointed at the envelope. But clumsiness does not place an envelope on top of your trash, angled like a clue. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Correct. A secretary repairing a seal may be innocent, An envelope placed carefully in my wastebasket is not accident. It is intention. Saul spoke from where he stood near the door, still half invisible even in our office. Somebody wanted it discovered by Archie, not by mail, not by the front door, not by Fritz, by Archie. Wolfe's gaze flicked to Saul. Yes, that is why it was placed in the wastebasket. On top, visible, angled, I said. And that placement dodges fingerprints in the mail. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. Someone wished the card to reach me without the usual chain. No postal marks, no return address, no stamp, no routine record. Yet it still passed through institutional hands at Hearthstone. That is the elegance of it. It uses an innocent stream, then exits the stream without leaving an official ripple. I sat back, feeling the case tighten again. So what? The Hearthstone office was the laundering step. The envelope becomes part of their Valentine mail flow. Then it slips out and ends in your trash, as if you rejected it. Wolfe's eyes were cold. Yes, Saul said. Martin Hale tried to steer away from mail. He did it too fast. Wolfe nodded. Mr. Hale's eagerness is suspicious, but suspicion is not proof. I rubbed my forehead. We have the messenger. We have the paste. We have the secretary. We have the chair. We also have that other package Saul brought earlier. Brown paper and twine, delivered with a message that I would know what to do with it. Wolfe's gaze drifted to the package on the side table, still unopened. Yes, we also have escalation, I said. What's our next move? Wolfe's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. We determine who benefits from controlling this envelope's discovery. We determine what message is being forced upon me by placement, rather than content. And we determine the identity of the person who could enter my office, access my wastebasket, and place an envelope there without detection. I blinked. That narrows it to people who have been in this house, or someone who was permitted entry by someone already in the house. My spine tightened slightly. The brownstone is safe, but it is not sealed. Fritz opens the door. Saul had visited. Delivery men come. Clients come. Kramer comes. Any house in New York is only as secure as its habits. I said, you think someone used Hearthstone to get the envelope into circulation, then used our own routines to plant it in your trash? Wolfe nodded. Yes, the intent was control over discovery, not secrecy, not romance. Control. I looked at the sealed Valentine and felt again the stubborn weight of it, even from across the desk. So, I said, we still have not opened it. Wolfe's expression did not change. Not yet, Saul asked. When? Wolfe's voice was flat. When opening it serves us. At present, it would serve the sender. I leaned forward, because there was one part still itching my mind. Cal said, Helen asked him to bring any returns to her personally. That means she was afraid of someone else in that office. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes. And he said she kept looking at the door while she used the paste. I added. Like she expected someone. Wolfe nodded once. Yes, I said. So maybe Helen is being pressured. Maybe the committee chair. Maybe someone else. Maybe the donor whose invitation was missing. Martin Hale. Wolfe's gaze sharpened slightly at the donor name. Martin Hale. Yes, I said. The invitation that went missing was for her. Wolfe was silent for a moment, which is always ominous. Then he spoke with the calm certainty that makes my job harder. Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow morning, you will call upon Mr. Hale. You will not mention Valentines. You will mention missing invitations, returns, and control. You will observe her hands. I sighed. Hands again. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Hands are reliable, Saul said. Want me to follow Helen? Wolfe's eyes flicked to Saul. Not yet. You will instead determine where Cal Turner delivered his returns yesterday between 10 and noon. We will identify who could have placed the returned envelope on Helen Brooks's desk while she was absent. Saul nodded once. Done. I stood and looked at the envelope on Wolfe's desk. Still sealed. Twice. still refusing to be read. "Boss," I said, "you called it a confession with manners." Wolfe's eyes stayed on the envelope. "Yes," I said. "Now it looks like something else." "What?" Wolfe asked. "A confession with gloves," I said. "Somebody wanted it to reach you without leaving fingerprints anywhere official." Wolfe's gaze turned cold, approving precisely. He leaned back slightly. "And now you understand why clumsiness is inadequate. Helen Brooks may be clumsy, she may be frightened, but she did not place that envelope in my wastebasket. Someone else did, someone who wished me to discover it on their terms." Outside, the February wind rattled the windows again, impatient as ever. Inside, the brownstone held steady, warm and orderly, as if it could shrug off anything. But a Valentine envelope had breached it. Not by force, not by mail, but by method. Summonen had used paste, pressure, and patience. Now Wolfe would return the favor. Chapter 5. The second seal's real job, if you spend enough time with Nero Wolfe, you begin to understand that he does not merely solve mysteries. He disassembles human intentions like a man taking apart a clock, laying the gears on his desk, and then asking why one of them is smeared with grease. That evening, after Saul left to pursue Cal Turner's return route, and I had made a couple of calls about Martin Hale, Wolfe sat in his chair with the Valentine envelope in front of him and regarded it as if it were an insult to paper. The brownstone was quiet. Fritz had gone upstairs to the kitchen to supervise Theodore's work, which is like supervising sunrise, but makes Fritz happy. Outside, the city's February wind kept throwing itself at our windows, as if it believed glass could be persuaded. Inside, the air was steady and warm, and Wolfe's office lamp made a soft pool of light on the desk. The envelope lay in that pool like a pale fish on a cutting board. Wolfe said, "The second seal's real job is concealment." I leaned back in my chair. "You mean it's there to hide that it was opened?" "Yes," Wolfe replied. "It is not meant to keep the card closed. It is meant to hide that it was ever opened." "That's an assumption," I said. "There's no tear line on the flap. If someone opened it, they did it neatly." Wolfe's eyes lifted, and he gave me the patient look he reserves for moments when he has to explain something obvious. "You are thinking of force," he said. "Steam opens paper politely." I blinked. "Steam." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Moisture, warmth, the gum softens. The flap lifts without tearing. It is then resealed. A person who wishes to read without leaving crude evidence uses steam." I looked at the envelope again. It was intact, smooth, no ragged fibers. It made sense. It also made my skin itch, because it meant someone had handled the envelope with care, not panic. "So," I said, "first seal proper. Then someone steams it open, reads it, closes it, and then somebody else slaps on cheap paste in a hurry to hide the first seal line." Wolfe nodded. "Precisely. The act is not to secure, it is to obscure." "And you think Helen Brooks did the paste job?" Wolfe's gaze remained on the envelope. "I think Helen Brooks had access to paste and likely had a warm kettle. Committees drink tea with the solemnity of religion." I frowned. "That's thin." Wolfe's voice was calm. It is not thin when combined with her flinch, her insistence on personal returns, her office supplies, and Cal Turner's observation. "But we do not convict with thinness, we confirm." "And you want me to confirm the steam theory by finding a kettle?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You will confirm it by finding the environment that made steam convenient." I sighed. "All right, I'll go see if Helen Brooks runs a tea parlor." Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. "Do not be tiresome. Go." It was already late enough that most people in New York were either going to dinner or pretending to. Charity committee people are a special species. They believe their hours are flexible as long as someone else makes them dinner. I called Helen Brooks and told her I needed 5 minutes. She said she was still at the Hearthstone office and sounded as if she had been hoping I would not call again. I went. The Hearthstone shelter office was in a narrow suite above a modest storefront, clean and well lit. with posters of dogs and cats looking noble and pleading. The reception area smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. A volunteer in a bright scarf was sorting donation receipts with the distracted intensity of someone who had been promised purpose. Helen Brooks met me at her office door. She looked tired now, and that made her less controlled. Tired people leak. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, voice tight, "I have already shown the mail log. Inspector Kramer has already asked his questions." "I'm not Kramer," I said. "I ask different questions. Mine are rude in quieter ways." She did not smile. She stepped aside and let me in. Her office was small, tidy, and arranged for constant paper. Desk, chair, file drawers, a side table with supplies. The ledger was there, the stamp pad, the paste jar, the brush cap, and on a small warming plate near the back, a kettle not, a fancy kettle, a practical one. Metal, used and scratched, kept warm the way some people keep resentments warm. I nodded toward it. "Tea." Helen's eyes flicked to the kettle. "Yes, I drink tea. Constantly," I said. She tightened. "It helps. It also produces steam," I said. Her eyes widened slightly. "What?" I kept my tone casual, because casualness makes guilt relax. Wolfe thinks the envelope was opened by steam. No tear line, polite opening. Then it was resealed. "Your kettle makes that convenient." Helen's face went pale. Her hands moved automatically, straightening a pen that did not need straightening. "That's ridiculous," she said. "Maybe," I said. "But Cal Turner remembers you told him to wait while you fixed the seal. He remembers paste. He remembers you looking at the door like you expected someone." Helen swallowed. "Cal talks too much." "Cal remembers too much," I corrected. "That's his business." Helen's voice trembled slightly. "I did not open anything." I held up a hand. "I didn't say you did. I said your office makes steam convenient, and you had paste, and you repaired the seal." Helen's eyes darted, then returned. "The gum failed." I nodded slowly. "Then why repair it in haste? Why not just replace the envelope? You have identical stock, you mail dozens. If it was just gum failing, you could toss it and start over." Helen's mouth tightened. "It wasn't mine to toss." "There we are," I said gently. "Not yours. Someone else's. Someone gave you instructions." Helen's throat worked. She looked toward the kettle again, then away, as if the kettle were a witness. I leaned on the edge of her desk. "Helen, this is the part where you stop helping the wrong person. You told us one invitation went missing and then returned. You told us it appeared on your desk while you were absent. You told us you count batches. You flinched when envelopes were mentioned. You are involved whether you like it or not." Helen's eyes filled with a quick shine. "I didn't mean to be." "Of course not," I said. "Most trouble in New York begins with someone not meaning to." She swallowed. "It was left on my desk." I waited. "Silence is often more persuasive than questions," Helen whispered. "It was that envelope, the one that ended in Wolfe's wastebasket," I said. She nodded miserably. "Yes." "And there were instructions," I said. Helen's fingers clenched. "A note, not written on the envelope, a separate slip." "What did it say?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Make sure it stays shut." I felt a small jolt of satisfaction. It was ugly, but it was clarity. "You assumed it was romantic embarrassment," I said. Helen nodded. "Yes, I thought someone had written something foolish or intimate and panicked. I thought it was. Someone trying to protect themselves from being exposed." "You obeyed," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "I didn't think. I fixed it. I used paste because the gum looked uneven. I thought if it stayed shut, it would be forgotten." "But it didn't stay shut," I said. Somebody had already opened it. Helen's eyes squeezed shut for a moment. "I didn't know that." "Or you didn't want to know," I said gently. She opened her eyes and looked at me with a tired anger. "I didn't want to know. We have donors. We have animals. We have people who think charity means purity. If there was some personal mess, I didn't want it in my office. That is how trouble thrives, I said. People obey because they want silence. Helen's shoulders sagged. I know. I straightened. Now, the only question that matters, who gave you the instruction? Helen's eyes darted toward the door again. That same habit Cal had noticed. The February evening outside pressed against the window, grey and cold. She hesitated. Wolfe had called it hesitation you can measure. Seeing it now in a human face made it more interesting and more sad. Helen's pause was long enough to count, and the count was full of fear. I waited without speaking. Pressure is a better tool when you do not announce it. Helen finally exhaled, and her voice came out small. Martin Hale. I nodded once, as if I had expected it. Hale, I said, the committee chair. Helen's eyes were wet now, but her voice carried a little relief, the relief of finally putting a name on a weight. He came in, placed the envelope on my desk, told me to make sure it stayed shut, and left, like it was nothing, like it was a routine instruction. Did he say why? I asked. Helen shook her head. Number, he was in a hurry. He always is. He said it like he owned the office. He behaves like that in the parlor too, I said. Helen's mouth tightened. He is generous. He funds things. People let him. Generosity buys silence, I said. Helen whispered. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered, I said. It mattered enough for a Valentine to travel through 3 hands and end in Nero Wolfe's trash. Helen flinched at the word trash. Why would he do that? That's Wolfe's question, I said, and now I can bring him the name that makes the question sharp. I stood to leave. Helen's voice stopped me. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, I said. She swallowed. Am I in trouble? I looked at her. She was not a villain. She was what Wolfe calls a competent person who becomes a tool because she wants peace. New York is full of them. You're in danger, I told her. Trouble is already in your office. You can either keep holding the kettle warm for it, or you can let Wolfe boil it dry. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she nodded. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his office behind his desk, as if he had never moved. The Valentine envelope still lay there, pale and stubborn. The brown paper package still sat on the side table, unopened, patient. Wolfe looked up as I entered. You found the kettle? Yes, I said, warm constantly. Wolfe nodded slightly. And the instruction. I told him what Helen had said, carefully, because Wolfe values exact wording. It was left on her desk with a slip, I said. Make sure it stays shut. She assumed romantic embarrassment and obeyed. She used paste. She did not destroy it because it wasn't hers to toss. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who gave the instruction? I did not hesitate. Martin Hale. There was a pause, but it was not hesitation. It was Wolfe adjusting the shape of the case in his mind and liking the fit. Then Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. It was not a smile the way other men smile. It was a small shift that meant satisfaction, because now a pattern had a name. Hesitation, Wolfe murmured. Now it has a human shape. I sat down and exhaled. So Hale is the hand that ordered the seal repaired. That means he knew it had been opened, or he suspected it would be. Wolfe's eyes stayed on the envelope. Yes, and he wanted it to stay shut, I said. Not because it needed to be shut, but because he needed it to appear shut. Wolfe nodded. The second seal's real job. Concealment, I said. Wolfe's voice was calm. Exactly. I leaned forward. Now what? Wolfe's gaze drifted to the brown paper package on the side table. Now we go to Mr. Hale. I blinked, not the Valentine. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Not yet. Of course. I should have known. Wolfe never opens the obvious thing until he has arranged the room so that the opening becomes a verdict. Outside, February wind rattled the windows again, impatient and cold. Inside, Wolfe had warmed the case to a boil. And now, with Martin Hale's name in the air, the hesitation in the envelope's pressure, Marx finally had a face to match it. Chapter 6. A man who wanted the message unread. If you want to see how fast a man's charm curdles, ask him to explain why he treated another person's words like contraband. Most men can sell you kindness and concern until you mention control. Then their eyes harden, because control is the part they actually own. The next morning was a hard February grey, the kind that makes the city look as if it has been rubbed with a dirty eraser. The brownstone was warm and competent. As always, Fritz had arranged breakfast in the dining room with the quiet authority of a man who believes hunger is a solvable problem. Wolfe had eaten, scowled at the weather, visited his orchids, and come down to the office with the air of a man prepared to be offended by the day. I told him Helen Brooks had named Martin Hale. Wolfe listened, nodded once, and said, "We will now speak with Mr. Hale." "Where?" I asked. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "In his natural habitat, where he can attempt to charm us and fail." That meant we were leaving the brownstone, which is always unpleasant for Wolfe and occasionally dangerous for the city. Wolfe put on his coat with a dignity that suggested the coat was to blame, and we went out into the cold. Martin Hale's office was in a midtown building that smelled like polished stone and legal caution. It had a lobby designed to make you feel small and grateful, and an elevator that moved with the slow arrogance of money. Hale's receptionist was a young woman with perfect hair and the expression of someone trained to smile without committing to anything. When I gave my name, she hesitated, then vanished into an inner office, as if fleeing from a draft. Martin Hale came out quickly, smile ready, suit crisp, hair perfect. "Mr. Goodwin," he said warmly, "and Mr. Wolfe, this is unexpected." "It is often unpleasant," Wolfe replied. Martin's smile tightened a fraction. "What can I do for you?" Wolfe did not answer immediately. He walked past Martin into the office as if invited, because Wolfe is rarely stopped by social fences. I followed, because my job is to keep Wolfe from being arrested for discourtesy. Martin closed the door behind us. His office was large enough to make a man feel important even if he wasn't, which probably explained why Martin spent his days in it. There were framed photographs on the wall, Martin shaking hands with prominent people, Martin on a stage, Martin with a sheltered dog that looked as if it had been bribed. Martin gestured toward a seating area. "Please sit." Wolfe remained standing. Martin blinked, then sat himself as if deciding to hold his own ground. I sat, because standing through Wolfe interrogations is exhausting and unnecessary. Martin said, "If this is about the charity committee, I assure you everything is proper. We have donors to protect. We have privacy to respect." I leaned forward. "That's funny you should mention privacy." Martin's smile stayed steady. "It's always relevant." "Tell me about the Valentine envelope," I said. Martin's smile thinned. "What envelope?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not insult us. You instructed your secretary to ensure it remained shut. That alone is admission." Martin's gaze flicked. "Quick, Helen told you that." Wolfe's voice was calm. "Yes, now answer." Martin exhaled, and the smile returned, softer, gentler, the smile of a man explaining a minor misunderstanding to children. "It was a matter of protecting a donor," he said. "Nothing more. The charity world is full of gossip. An envelope addressed in a way that could cause personal embarrassment should not become entertainment." I nodded. "So you protected privacy by putting the envelope in Nero Wolfe's wastebasket." Martin's smile faltered. "What?" Wolfe spoke softly, and the softness carried steel. "Privacy does not require placing an envelope in my wastebasket." Martin stared at Wolfe, and his charm did what it always does under Wolfe's gaze. It attempted to retreat. Wolfe does not allow retreat without leaving tracks. Martin's voice sharpened slightly. "I did not place anything in your wastebasket." Wolfe's eyes remained calm. "Then you will explain how it arrived there." Martin's jaw tightened. "I do not know," I said. "That's not going to work. We already know the envelope was sealed properly, opened by steam, resealed with paste in Helen's office, and then planted in Wolfe's trash on top, angled, visible. That's a chain. You are in it, so talk. Martin's eyes flicked to me, then back to Wolfe. You have no right to demand anything. Wolfe's gaze was cold. I have the right to refuse your pretense. Martin's mouth tightened. Fine, yes, I intercepted the envelope. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. Attentive, proceed. Martin exhaled. It was part of our outgoing batch. I recognized the handwriting. I leaned in. Recognized it from what? Martin hesitated. That hesitation was different from Helen's. Helen's was fear, Martin's was calculation. Finally, he said it. My assistant. Wolfe's eyes stayed steady. Your assistant wrote it. Martin's jaw clenched. Yes. And you recognized her handwriting on the envelope, Wolfe said. Yes, Martin replied, voice tight. She has a very controlled hand. It stands out. I nodded. Controlled enough for you to pick out in a stack. Martin looked irritated. Yes. Wolfe's tone remained calm. And you believed the contents would disrupt something. Martin's eyes hardened. We have an engagement announcement planned for the gala. I blinked. An engagement announcement at a shelter benefit. Martin's smile returned faintly, proud now. It brings donors. It makes headlines. It helps the shelter. Wolfe's gaze was cold. It helps you. Martin's jaw tightened. It helps both. I said. So your assistant's Valentine threatened your headline. Martin's eyes flashed. It could have been misconstrued. It could have caused gossip. It could have damaged the announcement. Wolfe spoke softly. So you opened it. Martin's mouth tightened. I did not want to. I needed to know what it was. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. And you opened it by steam. Martin's gaze flicked away. I said, you steamed it open like a polite burglar. Martin's eyes snapped back, angry. I was protecting her. Wolfe's gaze did not change. You were protecting your plan. Martin swallowed, then continued, as if wanting to finish quickly before he heard himself. I read enough to panic, Martin admitted. It was not romantic nonsense. It was a message. It was going to complicate things. It named people. It was emotional. It was dangerous. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So you resealed it? Martin nodded. Yes, I pressed the flap, but it did not look right. I needed it to appear untouched. I brought it to Helen and told her to make sure it stayed shut. I used her as a tool. Wolfe's voice was flat. Cowardice. Martin stiffened. Number management. Wolfe's gaze turned colder. Cowardice disguised as management. Martin's face reddened. You don't understand the stakes. Wolfe's voice was calm. I understand control. Martin exhaled sharply. Fine, I did not want the envelope discussed. I did not want gossip. I did not want my name attached to it. I leaned forward. Then why not destroy it? Martin froze. That question had been sitting in the case like a nail. Wolfe had pointed at it from the beginning. It was the mistake that made the whole thing smell less like protection and more like manipulation. Wolfe spoke, quiet and exact. Yes, you read it, yet you did not destroy it. That is irrational if your motive is privacy. It is entirely rational if your motive is control. You redirected it to me. Martin's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man realizing the argument he had rehearsed was not airtight. I wanted Wolfe to handle it quietly. Martin said finally, voice low. I know his reputation, discretion logic. I thought he could speak to the person involved, calm things down, keep it from exploding at the gala. And keep your name out of it, I said. Martin's jaw tightened. Yes. Wolfe's eyes were cold. So you placed it where it would be found. In my wastebasket. You wished it to appear rejected by me, so that when the sender asked, you could say truthfully that Mr. Wolfe had discarded it. You used my habits to launder your responsibility. Martin stared at Wolfe. I didn't place it. Wolfe's voice was steady. Then you arranged for someone else to, perhaps your assistant, perhaps a courier, perhaps a person with access to my office. We will identify that person. Martin's hands tightened on the chair arms. His charm was gone now. What remained was the hard, managerial core, and that core was afraid. "You're making this into something it isn't," Martin said. Wolfe's tone was calm. "You made it into what it is when you opened another person's letter." Martin's voice rose. "I was trying to prevent harm." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "You were trying to prevent harm to yourself." Martin's face twisted. "You don't know what she wrote." Wolfe's gaze was cold. "And yet you read it." Martin swallowed, then said almost grudgingly, "Yes." I felt it then, the shift. It was not about romance. It was about power. Martin Hale had treated his assistant's words like a dangerous asset. He had opened them, evaluated them, and redirected them the way he redirected donations. He wanted the message unread, not because he respected privacy, but because he wanted to decide who got to know it. Wolfe's voice was steady. "Mr. Hale, you have confessed to intercepting the envelope and opening it. You have admitted you used Miss Brooks to reseal it. You have admitted your motive was to protect your planned engagement announcement and your own reputation. You will now tell us the assistant's name." Martin's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because," Wolfe said, "your assistant is the origin of this affair, and because she is the person whose words you attempted to control." Martin hesitated again, then spoke, resigned. "Lila Grant." "And," Wolfe said, "you will tell us where Miss Grant is at this moment." Martin's mouth tightened. "At work, in this building." Wolfe's gaze remained calm. "Then we will speak with her." Martin's eyes widened slightly. "Number that will only make it worse." Wolfe's voice was flat. "It will make it true." Martin rose from his chair, angry now, as if anger could rebuild the charm he had lost. "You cannot walk in here and dismantle my life because of a Valentine card." Wolfe's eyes were cold. "I am not dismantling your life. I am dismantling your control over another person's words. That control is what brought the card to my wastebasket." I stood because the temperature in the room had dropped to a level that required motion. "Boss, we still haven't opened the card." Wolfe glanced at me. "We will." Martin's voice snapped. "You will not open it. It is private." Wolfe's gaze turned to him, heavy and final. "You forfeited the right to invoke privacy when you steamed it open yourself." Martin's mouth tightened. He had no answer, because there is no answer to that. We left his office with Martin Hale standing behind us, the man who had tried to keep a message unread, now trapped by the fact that he had read it first. In the elevator down, I exhaled and looked at Wolfe. "So the case isn't about romance." Wolfe's voice was calm. "It is about power." I nodded. "Power over who gets to speak, who gets to know, and who gets to pretend they never touched the letter." Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. "Exactly." I thought of the Valentine envelope, still sealed twice on Wolfe's desk, carrying a message that had been handled like a dangerous object. Someone had written words, someone else had stolen them. Someone had attempted to bury them in a wastebasket. Wolfe was not sentimental, but he respects logic. And logic includes one simple rule. Words belong to the person who wrote them. We headed back into the February cold. And I knew the next step, we were going to open the card. Finally, not because the sender wanted it opened, but because Wolfe had arranged the room so that opening it would be a verdict. Chapter 7. The sender with the steady hand. If there is one thing Nero Wolfe dislikes more than a liar, it is a liar who lies lazily. Martin Hale had been lazy. He had tried to cover himself with the first name that sounded plausible, like a man tossing a coat over a spill and hoping the carpet will forget. When he told Wolfe his assistant was Lila Grant, he expected Wolfe to accept it because it fit the shape of his story. Assistants have steady handwriting. Assistants prepare invitations. Assistants get blamed. But the trouble with Wolfe is that he never accepts the shape first. He measures the seams. Back at the brownstone that afternoon, Wolfe sat behind his desk with the Valentine envelope in front of him and looked at it as if it were an exhibit in a museum of cowardice. Fritz had brought coffee for me and something richer for Wolfe, because Wolfe considers caffeine a tool and food a principle. The February wind was still scraping at the windows, and the brownstone was still refusing to care. Wolfe said. Mr. Hale lied. That's a surprise, I replied. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He lied without care. It offends me. I sipped my coffee. You mean Lila Grant does not exist? Wolfe's mouth tightened. She exists. She is employed. She is not the hand. The hand, I said. The handwriting. Wolfe nodded slightly. Yes. The handwriting on the envelope is controlled. It is restrained. It contains neither flourish nor vanity. Miss Grant's office samples, which Mr. Panzer obtained within 10 minutes, are decorative. She writes as if she expects applause. I blinked. Saul got samples. Wolfe looked at me as if I had asked whether the sun rises. Of course, he is efficient. I leaned back. So Martin recognized the handwriting, but it was not his showy assistant. It was someone else. Someone he wanted to protect less, or someone he could control more. Wolfe's gaze stayed on the sealed envelope. Precisely, I said. Then who? Wolfe's eyes lifted. A careful man. That narrows it to most of Manhattan on a good day, I said. Wolfe ignored that. A careful man who counts his steps and never raises his voice. I frowned. You know him. I know the type. Wolfe corrected. They are often employed near loud men to serve as contrast. Loud men enjoy contrast. It makes them appear decisive. I started to protest, then stopped because Wolfe had that look. He had already found the man. He was simply allowing me the pleasure of catching up. The sender is Evan Ward, Wolfe said. The name landed with no drama. That was appropriate. If the sender was truly careful, his name would arrive quietly too. I stared. Evan Ward. Who is he? Wolfe's voice was calm. He's the man Martin Hale thinks no one notices. He assists in the committee's operations without holding a title large enough to threaten Mr. Hale's self-esteem. He also, incidentally, seals envelopes properly. How did you find him? I asked. Wolfe lifted a finger. 3 facts: the charity stationery, the controlled handwriting, the hesitation marks. Those marks were not merely pressure. They were a pattern. A line began, stopped, then resumed with a different force. That is not a person interrupted by a phone call. That is a person interrupted by his own caution. I sat forward, meaning he started to write, hesitated, then kept going. Yes, Wolfe said. Such hesitation is common when a man writes something he believes he should not. It is uncommon in women who manage committees. They write what must be written. They do not hesitate over sentiment, but a man writing a restrained Valentine, overdue to a woman he respects, will hesitate precisely that way. I whistled softly. You are turning paper into psychology. Wolfe's gaze was steady. Paper is obedient. People are not. He pressed a button on the desk intercom and spoke to Fritz. Fritz, please ask Mr. Panzer to come in. Saul appeared a few minutes later, fresh from the cold, his eyes bright. He handed Wolfe a folded note without ceremony. Wolfe glanced at it once. Mr. Ward is in his office. He is alone. He has been alone every afternoon this week at approximately 4 o'clock. Mr. Hale does not value him enough to schedule him. Saul's mouth tightened slightly. That was Saul's way of showing contempt for Martin Hale without wasting words. Wolfe looked at me. Mr. Goodwin, you will fetch Mr. Ward. I blinked. Fetch, yes, Wolfe said. Do not bring him by force. Bring him by reason. He will respond to reason. He is one of the few. I stood because arguing with Wolfe when he is correct is exhausting. All right, I'll go collect your careful man, Wolfe added. Be courteous. I said, that will be my first mistake. Saul offered. I can come. Wolfe shook his head. Number Mr. Goodwin will suffice. Mr. Ward will be intimidated by stealth and comforted by bluntness. That sounded insulting to me. But it was probably true. I went. Even Ward worked out of the Heartstone shelter offices, not in the bright townhouse parlor, where the committee performed warmth, but in the smaller suite, where actual work happened. The reception volunteer in the bright scarf remembered me and looked as if she had been hoping I would not return. "I need to see Evan Ward," I said. She hesitated. "Why?" "Because his handwriting is better than his luck," I told her. That confused her enough to make her point. Evan Ward's office was a cubby with a desk, a file cabinet, and one plant that looked like it was surviving on spite. Evan himself was sitting at his desk with a folder open, reading it carefully as if it had feelings. He looked up when I entered. He was in his late 20s or early 30s, neat hair, neat shirt, neat everything. He had the kind of face that does not waste expression. His eyes were steady. His posture was straight without being proud. "You are Archie Goodwin," he said, and it was not a question. "That's me," I replied. "And you are Evan Ward." He nodded once. "Yes." "You write like you count," I said. His mouth tightened slightly. "I count because things get lost. That's why I'm here," I said. "Something got lost, an envelope." His eyes flicked down for an instant, then back up. It was quick, but it was an admission. "I don't know what you mean," he said softly. "You do," I replied. "A Valentine envelope on Heartstone stationery, sealed properly, opened by steam, resealed with paste, in Helen Brooks's office, planted in Nero Wolfe's wastebasket." His face stayed steady, but the skin at his jaw tightened. He did not speak. I continued, gentler, "Because men like Evan will close up if you shove them. Mr. Ward, Wolfe does not enjoy being used as a disposal service for someone else's message. He also does not enjoy seeing a man's intention handled like a dirty object. You have a chance to straighten it." Evan swallowed once. "Nero Wolfe." "Yes," I said. "He wants to see you now." Evan's eyes narrowed slightly, cautious. "Why?" I said. "Because your card was read by the wrong eyes." That hit him. His expression did not change much, but his eyes sharpened with pain that he could not pretend was not there. "I did not tell anyone," he said quietly. "I did not accuse anyone." "I know," I said. "You grew quiet and watched the office like a man waiting for weather to change." His gaze dropped to the folder on his desk. He closed it carefully, as if not wanting to bruise the paper. "I sealed it," he said. I waited. He spoke slowly, each word measured. "It was meant for Helen." "Helen Brooks," I said. He nodded. "Yes, an honest Valentine," I said. He looked at me sharply for an instant, then lowered his gaze. "Restrained, thoughtful, overdue." "Overdue," I repeated. He exhaled. "She does everything. She keeps the committee from collapsing. People thank her in public and burden her in private. I wanted to write something simple, something decent." I nodded. "So you wrote it?" "Yes," he said. "I sealed it. And then I regretted sealing it." Now I could see it, not on paper, but in the way Evan's fingers touched the edge of his desk, as if he were tracing the moment he stopped. "I nearly retrieved it," Evan said softly. "I went back to the outgoing stack. I put my hand on it. I stopped. Then I pulled back. Then I touched it again. I could almost see the pressure marks forming under his fingers." "You left the indentations," I said. He nodded once. "Yes. Then Martin Hale took it," I said. Evan's mouth tightened. "He took it for review." "For review," I repeated. "That is what he calls it," Evan said quietly. "He reviews everything. He reviews words. He reviews people. Like bosses take lives apart without meaning to," I said. Evan's eyes lifted, and there was anger there for the first time, controlled but real. He means to. That was another important difference. Evan was careful, but he was not blind. "Come with me," I said. "Wolfe wants to speak to you, and he wants to speak to Helen too. He is going to do something unusual." Evan hesitated. He added, "He is going to restore dignity." Evan's eyes narrowed. "How?" I said. "By giving you the chance to offer your words the way you meant to, not through a committee, not through your boss, not through a mail log, through you." Evan stood then, slowly, as if standing were a decision he had been delaying. He took his coat from the chair back, put it on carefully, and followed me out without another word. On the cab ride to West 35th Street, he stared out the window at the grey city, not because it interested him, but because he needed something neutral to look at. February gives people plenty of neutral. At the brownstone, Fritz admitted us with his usual calm. Evan looked around the hall as if he were entering a different kind of building, one with rules he did not know. I almost felt sorry for him, but then I remembered he had written a Valentine and sealed it, which takes more courage than most men manage in their whole lives. Wolfe was in the office behind his desk. Helen Brooks was there too, seated stiffly in the red leather chair, hands folded, eyes tired. She looked up when Evan entered, and the change in her expression was immediate. Surprise, then understanding, then a quick flush that she tried to suppress. Evan stopped just inside the office. His gaze met Helen's for a moment, and then he looked away, as if politeness required distance. Wolfe looked at Evan with steady attention. "Mr. Ward." Evan nodded slightly. "Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe's voice was calm. "You wrote the Valentine." Evan swallowed once. "Yes." Helen's hands tightened. "Evan." He looked at her briefly, then back to Wolfe. "I did not mean to cause trouble." Wolfe's mouth tightened. Trouble was caused by the man who opened it, not by the man who wrote it. Helen's eyes flicked down. Ashamed. Wolfe continued. "Mr. Ward, you intended this card for Miss Brooks." Evan nodded again. "Yes." Helen whispered. "You should not have." Evan's face stayed steady, but his voice softened. "Perhaps I should have done it sooner. Then it would not have been overdue." Helen's throat worked. She did not answer. Wolfe looked at both of them, and for a moment the office felt different. Wolfe is not sentimental, but he understands dignity because he has built his life around it, and he despises anyone who steals it from others. Wolfe said, "The card was read by the wrong eyes." Evan's jaw tightened. "I suspected." Wolfe nodded slightly. "You were correct. Mr. Hale opened it by steam. He resealed it through Miss Brooks. He then attempted to rid himself of responsibility by placing it in my wastebasket to be discovered by Mr. Goodwin." Helen's face reddened. "I did not know he had opened it." Wolfe's eyes remained calm. "I believe you." Evan's hands clenched once, then relaxed. He did not raise his voice. He did not blame. He simply absorbed the facts, the way careful men absorb weather. Wolfe leaned back slightly. "Now you may expect me to open the envelope and hand you the card, Mr. Ward." I did expect it. I expected Wolfe to produce the card, like evidence, and drop it on the desk, with a remark sharp enough to cut paper. Instead, Wolfe said, "I will not." I blinked. Helen blinked. Evan's eyes widened slightly, and that was remarkable because Evan did not waste expressions. The card's dignity lies in being offered unopened, by the sender to the receiver, not exposed like a specimen on my desk. I stared at Wolfe. "Boss, you mean you still have not opened it?" Wolfe's gaze flicked to me. "Correct," Helen whispered, "but Martin opened it." Wolfe nodded. "Yes, but we do not restore dignity by repeating the theft." Evan's voice was quiet. "Then what do we do?" Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly, and this time it was almost what you might call a smile. "We arrange one controlled moment." I said, "Controlled, of course." Wolfe ignored that. "A simple tea. No committee, no audience, no speeches, merely February honesty." Helen's eyes widened, uncertain. "Tea." Wolfe nodded toward the side table. "Fritz will bring it. Mr. Ward will offer the envelope, unopened, to Miss Brooks. Miss Brooks will choose to open it or not. That choice belongs to her. It always should have." Evan stood very still. His throat worked once. "You are giving it back?" Wolfe's eyes were steady. "I am removing myself from it. That is different. I wanted to argue because that is my habit, but something in Wolfe's calm stopped me. He was not being kind for its own sake. He was being exact. He was restoring the only thing that mattered, the rightful path of a message. Fritz entered then with a tray, cups and a pot, moving as if he were delivering normal afternoon tea rather than repairing the damage done by a committee chair's vanity. He placed the tray quietly on the side table and left without looking at anyone too long, because Fritz respects privacy more than Martin Hale ever did. Wolfe stood, which was the most dramatic thing he could do without raising his voice. "Mr. Goodwin and I will be upstairs for 10 minutes. You may speak without us." I blinked. Upstairs. "Yes," Wolfe said. "I will inspect my orchids. It will soothe me." "And me," I said, because I would rather face orchids than face the awkwardness of two decent people trying to speak in a room that has seen too many lies. Wolfe moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at Evan Ward. "Mr. Ward," Wolfe said, "your card was meant to be given, not managed. Give it." Evan nodded once. Wolfe left, I followed. "In the hall," I said softly, "you are really not going to open it?" Wolfe's voice was calm. "Number," I said. "That's unusual for you. You hate not knowing contents." Wolfe's gaze was steady. "I already know the essential content. It is honest. The dishonesty was in the handling." I snorted quietly. "You sound almost moral." Wolfe glanced at me. "Do not be foolish. I am practical. Honesty must be protected when it is rare." Upstairs, the plant rooms were warm and humid, and Wolfe's orchids sat in orderly rows, silent and demanding. Wolfe moved among them with the calm satisfaction of a man in control of something that deserves control. He checked a leaf, adjusted a valve, breathed as if breathing had finally become reasonable. After 10 minutes, we went back down. In the office, Helen Brooks and Evan Ward were still there. The teacups were used. Helen's eyes were red, but she was not ashamed of it now. Evan looked lighter, which was strange because he had not moved much. The envelope was still sealed, but it was in Evan's hands, not on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe took one look and nodded slightly. "Good." Evan stood, composed. "Thank you." Wolfe's gaze was steady. "Thank Miss Brooks if she accepts your words." Evan nodded. Helen stood too, smoothing her skirt with careful fingers. She looked at Wolfe. "What about Martin?" Wolfe's eyes turned cold again, because business is business, and Wolfe does not confuse restored dignity with unfinished work. "Mr. Hale will answer to Inspector Kramer for his interference and his trespass in my office. He will also answer to me, which may be less comfortable," I said. "So this case ends with tea." Wolfe looked at me. "It ends with correction." Outside, the February wind still rattled the windows, impatient as ever. Inside, the brownstone held steady, and for the first time since I had found that double-sealed envelope sitting on top of Wolfe's trash like a placed clue, it felt as if the message had finally returned to its proper owner. Not the committee, not the chair, not Wolfe. The person who wrote it and the person it was meant for. That, I realized, was the real mystery Wolfe had been solving all along. Not romance. Power over someone else's words. Chapter 8. The card that confessed without being read. A Nero Wolfe office gathering is usually arranged for one purpose: to make the truth unavoidable. It is not always loud, it is not always bloody, but it is always final, because Wolfe does not gather people merely to entertain them. He gathers them to force their pretenses to stand in the same room as facts, and facts are heavier. That afternoon, the brownstone had the kind of quiet that comes after snow threatens, but does not arrive. The February wind was still prowling outside, rattling the windows with a sour persistence. But inside the house was warm and steady, lit by lamps that had seen many confessions and never flinched. Fritz moved through the hall with the calm confidence of a man whose chief concern was whether the soup was developing correctly. Theodore was in the kitchen, making something that smelled like a promise you could eat. Wolfe had been to the plant rooms and back, restored by orchids and routine. He sat behind his desk in the big chair, his hands folded, his expression composed. He had arranged chairs in the office in the way he prefers when the matter is not murder but dignity. That is a smaller kind of crime, but Wolfe treats all crimes against order with the same contempt. I was at my desk, pretending to do paperwork, which is my way of staying busy, when Wolfe is about to be dramatic. Saul Panzer had come and gone already, performing the invisible errands that make Wolfe's conclusions feel inevitable. Inspector Kramer was due, and that alone would have made it an official occasion. Helen Brooks arrived first. Fritz let her in, took her coat, and guided her to the office with polite efficiency. Helen entered with the cautious look of a woman expecting subpoenas. She carried a folder in her hands, the way secretaries carry folders when they want protection. She stopped just inside the office doorway. Evan Ward was standing near Wolfe's desk, not seated, not hiding, holding a pale envelope in both hands, as if it were something fragile and valuable. The envelope was still sealed. Helen's eyes went to it immediately. Then they went to Evan. Her face tightened with surprise, then softened with something quieter. "I thought," she began, and stopped. Wolfe's voice was calm. "You thought you would find paperwork?" Helen swallowed. "Yes. You have found something more difficult," Wolfe said. "You have found the truth in its proper hands." Helen's hands tightened on her folder. She glanced toward me, as if I might explain. I did not. It was not my office to explain in, and Wolfe had arranged the room to do it himself. Then Martin Hale arrived. He entered with the confident pace of a man who expects space to make room for him. That confidence slowed when he saw Helen and Evan together, and slowed again when he saw Wolfe's expression. A smile tried to appear, the practiced kind, but it came out thin. "Mr. Wolfe," Martin said, "this is unnecessary." Wolfe did not move. "On the contrary, it is precise." Martin's eyes flicked toward Evan's hands. "Is that?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "It is the envelope you intercepted, opened, resealed through Miss Brooks, and then arranged to be planted in my wastebasket." Helen inhaled sharply. Her face went pale, then flushed. She looked at Martin Hale with a new kind of focus, as if she were seeing him not as a generous chair, but as a man who had turned her into an instrument. Martin's jaw tightened. "I did not arrange for it to be planted." Wolfe's voice was calm. "Your denial is irrelevant. The envelope was planted. You benefited. That is sufficient for accountability." Inspector Kramer came in behind Martin, as if summoned by the smell of complication. Kramer's coat was damp from the weather. His face was set in its usual irritated frown, and his presence made the office feel official in a way that always irritates Wolfe. Kramer looked at Helen, at Evan, at Martin, and then at Wolfe. "This isn't a murder," he said. "No," Wolfe replied. "It is merely a theft of words and an attempted laundering of responsibility. You may find it less interesting, I do not." Kramer grunted, but he stayed. Kramer likes endings, even when the crime is not his favorite kind. Wolfe looked at all of them for a moment, then spoke with the measured clarity he uses when he wants no one to wriggle. "These are the facts," Wolfe said. An envelope was sealed properly by its sender. It was then opened by steam, without tearing. It was resealed using cheap paste, applied in haste to conceal the opening. It was then placed in my wastebasket, not discarded, but positioned for discovery. It was used as leverage to control who would speak and when, and to protect Mr. Hale's public plans from the inconvenience of private truth. Martin Hale's mouth tightened. "Leverage, that is melodramatic." Wolfe's gaze was cold. "It is accurate. You took possession of another person's words, you evaluated them, you attempted to manage their consequence. That is leverage." Helen's voice shook. "You told me to make sure it stayed shut." Martin's smile attempted to return, but it was brittle. "Helen, I was protecting you from gossip." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "If you wished to protect Miss Brooks, you would not have used her hands as a repair station. You would have kept your own hands on your own cowardice." Kramer made a sound of approval that tried to disguise itself as a cough. Evan Ward spoke then quietly, because Evan did not raise his voice even when the room demanded it. "I sealed it," Evan said. "The first seal, that was mine." Helen looked at him, eyes wide. "Evan." Evan's face stayed composed. "It was meant for you, a Valentine, not the committee, not the shelter, you." Helen's throat worked. She held her folder tighter, as if the folder might help her keep her expression steady. It did not. Evan continued, voice calm. I hesitated after I sealed it. I regretted it. Not because I did not mean it, but because I feared being ridiculous. I went back to retrieve it. I touched the envelope. I hesitated in a way you can measure. Wolfe nodded once, satisfied. Not because of romance, but because a theory had been confirmed with human words. Martin Hale's jaw clenched. This is absurd. Wolfe's gaze turned to him. It is only absurd to you because you believe dignity is a commodity you can manage. Helen whispered. You opened it. Martin's mouth tightened. He looked at Helen, then at Evan, then at Wolfe, and realized there was no version of the story left that made him look good. Yes, Martin admitted. I opened it. Kramer's eyebrows lifted. You admit opening someone else's mail. Martin glared at him. It was internal committee mail. Wolfe's voice was flat. It was not committee mail. It was personal correspondence, misusing committee stationery. That is a separate issue, and it is minor. Your issue was theft. Martin's hands clenched. I had reasons. Wolfe nodded. Yes, you feared disruption. You feared embarrassment. You feared that your planned engagement announcement at the gala would become contaminated by human reality. So you attempted to keep reality unread. Helen's eyes flashed. You cared more about the announcement than the shelter. Martin's mouth tightened. The announcement would bring donors. Wolfe's gaze was cold and would bring you applause. Martin's face reddened. So what? That helps the shelter too. Wolfe did not argue further. He does not debate with men who confuse self-interest and altruism because the debate is endless and useless. Instead, Wolfe did what he always does at the end. He presented the conclusion that made resistance expensive. Mr. Hale, Wolfe said calmly, your engagement announcement will be postponed. Martin stared. You cannot decide that. Wolfe's eyes stayed steady. I can, because I control what becomes known and when, and you have placed yourself in my hands by attempting to use me as a disposal method. You wanted me to handle it quietly. I will, quietly, cleanly, correctly. Martin's voice rose. This is blackmail. Wolfe's gaze was cold and amused. Number blackmail involves concealment. I am offering you an alternative to public humiliation. That is mercy. Kramer snorted. Sounds like blackmail with manners. Wolfe ignored him. Mr. Hale, if you proceed with your announcement, this matter will become known in the committee's social sphere, and your reputation will suffer precisely where you value it. If you postpone, the shelter will still receive donors, and you will appear thoughtful rather than manipulative. Refusal is expensive. Agreement is cheap. Martin Hale's face tightened. You could see the calculation. A man like Martin lives by cost and benefit. Wolfe had turned etiquette into arithmetic. Martin exhaled. Fine, postponed quietly. Wolfe nodded once. Correctly. Helen looked at Martin as if she wanted to say something sharp. Then she looked at Evan, and her sharpness softened into something else. Evan stepped forward then, holding the envelope out toward her. It was still sealed. Helen stared at it, and for a moment she did not move. Her hands trembled slightly, then steadied. She looked at Evan's face, then at the envelope again. You did not open it, she said softly. Evan shook his head. Number Mr. Wolfe would not allow it. Wolfe's voice was calm. I refused because the card's dignity lies in being offered unopened by the sender. To the receiver, Mr. Hale stole that dignity once. I will not steal it again. Helen's breath caught. She reached out and took the envelope as if it were warm. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she held it, looking at the second seal, the messier pasteline, the small betrayals made visible. Her eyes were wet, but she did not wipe them away now. She seemed to understand that the real message was already present, not in ink, but in the courage it took to bring it back to her. Kramer shifted, uncomfortable. He was a good cop in his own rough way, but this was not his kind of case. There was no body, no blood, no easy villain, just people trying to behave decently and failing. Wolfe glanced at Kramer. Inspector, you may leave if you wish. Kramer grunted. I'll stay. I want to see how this ends. It's unusual. It is, Wolfe agreed. Martin Hale stood stiffly, cornered not by handcuffs but by decorum. Wolfe had him exactly where Wolfe likes to put men like Martin, in a position where the only escape is to behave. Helen finally lifted the envelope slightly, her fingers touching the edge of the paste seal. She looked at Evan. You were afraid of being ridiculous, she said. Evan's mouth tightened slightly. Yes. Helen's voice softened. That is not ridiculous. Then, slowly, she broke the seal. Not with violence, not with impatience, but carefully, as if she were repairing something rather than opening it. The paste gave with a faint crackle. The gum seal beneath, the original seal, held a moment longer, stubborn, proper, then yielded. Helen pulled out the card. She opened it. The room was quiet. Even Kramer stopped breathing loudly. Helen read silently at first. Her face changed, not dramatically, but gently, like light shifting on snow. Whatever was written there was not theatrical, it was not ornate. It was simple, because Evan Ward was simple in the best way. Helen's lips moved once, as if repeating a line to herself. Then she looked up at Evan, and her voice was small but steady. It's simple, she said. Evan nodded, relieved and terrified at the same time. I meant it that way. Helen held the card to her chest for a moment, not as a display but as a private act of protection. Then she looked at Wolfe. Thank you, she said. Wolfe's expression did not soften. It did not need to. I corrected an intrusion. Gratitude is unnecessary. Kramer made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had been trained. Martin Hale cleared his throat, trying to regain some dignity. Is that all? Wolfe looked at him. For you, it is not all. You will apologize to Mr. Ward and Miss Brooks. You will do so sincerely, or your postponement will not remain quiet. Martin's jaw tightened. He glanced at Kramer, then at Wolfe, then at Helen. The room had become a tribunal, and etiquette was the law. Martin said stiffly, I apologize. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Again. Martin's face reddened. He swallowed. I apologize. I was wrong. Wolfe nodded slightly. Correct? Evan did not gloat. He simply stood, hands relaxed now, as if a weight had been shifted from his shoulders to the proper place. Helen looked at Martin once, then away, as if she did not want to waste her attention on him any longer. Wolfe leaned back. Now, this affair is concluded. Mr. Hale will postpone his announcement. Miss Brooks will retain her position without being used as an instrument. Mr. Ward will retain his dignity. Kramer stood. No charges. Wolfe's eyes flicked to him. If you wish to charge Mr. Hale with male interference, you may. I doubt you will. You prefer corpses. Kramer grunted. I prefer cases that stick. This will stick, Wolfe said, in memory. Martin Hale left soon after, his shoulders stiff, his smile gone, his reputation bruised in the only place he cared about. Helen and Evan remained a moment longer. Wolfe dismissed them with a nod, and Fritz appeared as if summoned by the scent of completion, to guide them out and offer coats and the quiet civility of the brownstone. When the office was mine again, I sat at my desk and stared at Wolfe. Well, I said, that's a new one. Wolfe's eyes were half closed. Not new, merely uncommon. No violence, I said. No theft of money. No gun, no blunt instrument. Words are often more valuable than money. They are also easier to steal because people treat them carelessly. I nodded slowly. And the confession. Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. The card confessed without being read by the proper person until it was. I leaned back and let the warmth of the brownstone settle around me. Outside, the February wind still rattled the windows, but it sounded less like a threat now, and more like the city being itself. I said, it feels strange for a mystery. Wolfe looked at me. Explain. I shrugged. Nothing stolen in the end. Nothing broken, just an envelope that traveled through too many hands until it reached the right ones. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly, approving. You are incorrect. Something was stolen. It was restored. That is the essence of resolution. I thought about the envelope sitting first in Wolfe's wastebasket, angled like a clue. I thought about paste and steam and committee smiles, tightening like ribbons. I thought about Martin Hale trying to manage another person's honesty, the way he managed donors. And I thought about Helen Brooks holding a sealed envelope, without opening it, because the real message had already arrived. In February, when the city hunches against cold and people hide behind routine, a small, honest confession can be the rarest thing in New York. Wolfe had not solved a murder. He had solved control, and the ending, strange as it was, felt right. Because sometimes a mystery is not about who killed whom. Sometimes it is about who tried to steal a simple truth and who insisted, stubbornly, on giving it back.